Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Employment Committee. I'm Councillor Stuart Brown, Chair of the Committee. Before we start, just a little housekeeping and safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts, and please assemble by the Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact this meeting is being live streamed. Please use the microphones and remember to switch them off when you have finished speaking, or the camera will stay on you. Members of the press and public are permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. We will start with introductions. Let's start with Councillor Bosher.
Councillor Simon Bosher, I'm a Conservative representative on the committee.
I'm Councillor Darren Sanders. I'm a Liberal Democrat representative on the committee.
Cal Corkery, Independent Councillor.
Councillor Charlotte Gerada, Labour representative.
Dave Ashmore, one of the Lib Dem councillors and also councillor for Fran.
Rochelle Williams, Human Resources.
Jeremy Underdown, Head of Facilities.
Jane Didino, Local Democracy Officer.
Lovely, thank you all very much. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. As all members of the committee are present, I assume there are no apologies. Number 2, declaration of members' interest. Members, does anyone have anything to declare in relation to today's agenda? Councillor Gerada.
I don't know if it's necessary to say, but I'm a member of Unite the Union and also GMB. Thank you.
Councillor Corkery.
Just for completeness, similar vein, I'm a member of Unite and Unison.
Thank you very much. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of November. Members, it is recommended that the minutes be confirmed and signed. If everyone's had a chance to skim through, are there any items members wish to raise in relation to the minutes? Or are we happy for me to sign them as a correct record? So signed. Lovely. Moving on, let's have a quick decision. Members, as Rochelle is introducing every item bar 1 and Jeremy is introducing one item, is it agreed that we change the agenda so that Jeremy can go first and make a discreet exit and not have to sit through most of the meeting? I will take the humorous responses as so agreed. So we will move to what is titled as item 6, which is our health and safety report. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Chair. My item is bringing to you the Health and Safety Annual Report for the year 24-25. Hopefully the body of the report speaks for itself. I've got no intention to go through it line for line, obviously unless you request me to. Just a reminder that last year when we brought this report, we kind of reset the timeline slightly with it. We used to bring this in November, which was kind of in the middle of the year, which didn't really give anybody the opportunity to kind of influence the next year's action plan or really let us know where we were in terms of assessing our previous year's action plan. So I think this is the first year where we properly bring it to you in March. So in terms of, I suppose, starting on last year's action plan, the health and safety team joined the facilities management service or moved to sit under the facilities management service about 18 months ago. And last year really was a good opportunity to focus heavily on a lot of groundwork in terms of putting the health and safety service into a good position, streamlining a lot of our processes so that we could make things easier for the organisation to report health and safety, and also to free up some much needed capacity within the team to look at instances and obviously drive that safety culture across the organisation. So a lot of our action plan focused on digitisation. and we were pretty successful in that area. We have managed to digitise our general incident reporting, how staff request eye tests and those sort of things. And we've certainly seen, which I think you see, and I'll touch upon shortly, in terms of the kind of number of instances that we're seeing reported to the Health and Safety Service has significantly increased, and I think that's in part a success of making it easier for people to report incidents with us, and obviously backed up by a communications plan that went with introducing the new processes. We also wanted to look heavily last year in site management responsibility and building management responsibility for all of the various officers that have that as part of their day-to-day responsibility. I suppose it's fair to say that we've been relatively successful in that area. It turned out to be quite a significant amount of work. It's no surprise to the committee that we obviously have a pretty diverse organisation with lots of different things going on across our various sites and responsibilities. So we've been able to develop the kind of the tool and the documentation that goes with that process. And we're going to be carrying that over into the action plan for the next year. And look to focus on that in the early part of the new fiscal year and get that out to site managers so that we can kind of fill that gap really between the kind of building compliancy type of things, fire risk assessments, Legionella, etc., and that kind of more practical day-to-day stuff that we want to see happening more across the organisation to really promote that safety culture. So that's something we're looking to focus on early in the turn of the fiscal year, recognised in our action plan for next year. I think there's three key areas in our action plan, sort of moving into the 25-26 year. Training is a particular focus that we want to look at. The introduction of the new managed learning system, which I think rolled out February of this year, thank you, Rochelle, gives us the opportunity to be more comfortable that our employees are undertaking the training that they need to make sure that we're meeting with our sort of safety requirements. But it's a great opportunity with that being rolled out to look at all of our various training courses and ensure that they're fit for purpose in a modern workforce. One area we want to look at specifically is certainly around training for executives and senior leaders. We think it's probably a bit of a hole in our current training practices, and it's a key step really in another area of our action plan, I suppose, going forward in clearly defining roles and responsibilities across the organisation, so that everyone is able to understand what they need to do to drive and promote that safety culture. And then I suppose having completed those two actions, I think we need to reflect and look at our current governance structure, obviously with roles and responsibilities understood, a plethora of data available to us through our incident reporting that we've able to achieve this year. There's an opportunity to better share that out across the organisation. I suppose focusing on, I suppose in a nutshell, that's the kind of sort of a quick sort of whistle-stop tour of our last year's action plan and kind of introducing next year's action plan. In terms of some of those key areas of the report itself, incident data is obviously something that we share with you as a committee. And as I touched upon, you'll see that the overall number of instances has increased over the last couple of years. They still fall within kind of industry expected norms for an organisation of our size. But I suppose encouragingly, if I'm going to put a positive spin on it, we expected to see an increase in the number of incidents reporting to us in terms of launching easier ways for people to report and promoting that significantly over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. And some of the years that still appear within that kind of 4 or 5 year reporting period obviously have some context around COVID years where people were working in significantly different ways. And I suppose encouragingly, when you look at actually the RIDDOR reportable instances, we're actually starting to see a decrease in the number of those, which are obviously the instances that tend to be the more serious and more significant to individuals in the organisation at large. Training I've touched upon. Again, the data was in the body of the report and is there for you to peruse. Again, that introduction of the managed learning system in February of this year, we hope that we will be able to obviously better understand and track the performance of our employees across the organisation going forward, and hope to see some improvements in that area when we report back to you next year. Questions?
Super, thank you very much, Jeremy. I've got one quick question not relating necessarily to the content of the report, but just want to double check something. Looking at the action plan for 24-25, obviously the actions are numbered 1, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Just want to double check if that's a numbering error or if there's an errant second action that's disappeared from the table.
Having read this several times in preparing the report, I'm pretty confident that it's just a numbering error and not a missing action.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Members, any questions or comments on the reports? Councillor Gerardo.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I had a couple of questions. So, firstly, on page, is it 17? Yes, I think it's 17, the asbestos. Just wondered if it's possible to tell the committee where the asbestos roof was, that affected area, if that's possible. And then the other question was around, so in 7.5, table 2, I understand what you're saying about it's become easier to report incidents and you were expecting that they'd obviously increase, but just looking obviously at schools incidents, that it's a really big increase obviously from one year to the next. So I just wondered if we had an idea as to why there's that big jump, and yeah, if you could give a bit more detail about that, that'd be great. Thank you.
No problem. So I'm happy to feed back to the committee, obviously, exactly where that incident took place. I don't want to guess off the top of my head, so I will double check and feed that back to you. The increase in reporting in schools, what we are seeing is certainly an increase in the number of kind of violent incident reports to us. So abuse to teachers and kind of those things. That's definitely the kind of growth area in terms of the number of incidents we're seeing in schools.
Councillor Drala?
Thank you. That's really, really worrying.
Yes.
I mean, I know probably this is out of your area because it's education, but is there a sort of plan to tackle that? Because that's obviously worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, we will continue to work with our school colleagues and look at ways that we can support them. Obviously, it's not a local trend. It's a trend. I understand we're seeing, nationwide in terms of that area. So we will continue to support our education colleagues specifically around that as an area and see how we can improve that or certainly assist in terms of training and well-being for dealing with those incidents.
Councillor Bosher.
Thank you very much, Chair. I follow on from what Councillor Gerardo was saying. You might have mentioned it, but I must have missed it. The years don't follow in chronological order. We go 22 to 23, then 24, 25. There's no 23, 24 in there.
I'm assuming that's because of the way that we rescheduled the reporting cycle?
It might well be, because the same applies to a previous table where we've not got that particular year in that. Is that the case in that particular instance?
Yeah, there's definitely an element where we were kind of double reporting almost, where we were reporting because we're reporting in the middle of the year. I mean, I'm happy to take that away and obviously clarify the exact years and data that goes with them for reassurance purposes.
Yeah, yeah, because following on from that, would that mean then that the significant increase that we see in incidents for 24-25 actually includes some figures from 23 to 24? So it's giving a false reading?
I don't think that's the case, actually. I think I'm fairly comfortable with the 24-25 figures because I know that we obviously introduced a more robust method for capturing and reporting data. But I will take that away and double check to make sure that the information flows as it should do.
Okay, so just taking that on face value then, that the figures here reflect the years because that's all we've got in front of us. It says in 7.5, Table 2 shows number of incidents reported to Corporate Health and Safety Team, and in brackets, accidents and violent incidents. What's the difference between the two? Because an accident is something completely different to a violent incident to me, and it would seem from the Table 2 that we've lumped them all in together, and to me they are two completely different things.
So yeah, I mean, it's probably obvious what, as you're highlighting. Obviously, an accident, slip, trip, fall, walking into a lamppost, something along those lines. Anything that falls into that. Obviously, a violent incident normally relates to another person being involved, a member of public or a school child, effectively. So what I'm guessing you're going to want me to do is break those down so that you can see exactly what those differences are. Well,
that's the point I was going to make. I think that table should really be two tables, because to me, I mean, yes, it is fairly obvious what an accident and a violent incident is in that terminology, but to lump them all in together doesn't give a true picture. I mean, if you look at that school incidents one, that 406, that could be 405 violent incidents and one accident. I doubt it, but it could equally be one violent incident and 405 accidents. And it would be better to actually understand the two, because as Councillor Gerard has put out, the violent incident bit is the bit that bothers me intensely in this particular instance. So perhaps going forward, this could reflect the difference between the two, which will give us a better picture. The other bit, which I think is actually quite a sad comment, if I may say so, is remain within the expected norms for the sector. It's almost if we're shrugging our shoulders on that. I get what you're trying to say, but surely we shouldn't be, as a council, striving to be within the expected norms of the sector. We should be trying to be better than that, in my view. And perhaps the other thing I would challenge a little bit on that one, previous years should also be taken into account as the workplace context was considerably different due to the global pandemic. Well, everybody was largely back in 2022, so that, that's at least 2.5 years worth of data. So arguably you could look at the 2020, 2021 figures and say global pandemic, but I'd argue that the three other blocks that you've got there is perhaps more back to normal living. And I think that to a certain degree, talking about the global pandemic is perhaps a little bit irrelevant in those sorts of years, if I'm brutally honest. But they're just my comments on that table. But I'd like to see incidents and accidents broken out into two separate tables, because I think that would give us a better picture rather than sitting here and second guessing that data. The other, if I can continue a little bit, Chair. The other one is the table, I'm guessing it's table 1, which is on the previous one, which is all the training courses. It's good to see the there's an uptake in a lot of them for 24, 25 considered with previous years. But again, I think that data might be slightly erroneous due to the reporting bit. But again, the bit that bothers me is the bottom one, personal safety and lone working. It would appear that there have been no training courses in the last year on that. Is that how I'm reading it?
I mean, that's how it can be read, certainly.
Well, that's how I am reading it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I've got to
of
read what
course.
I've got in front of me.
Indeed. I think the area that concerns me with the training statistics in general is they've been cobbled together from various sources, and we have suffered without having a robust training environment and a robust learning system to kind of record and capture all of our various courses. There certainly will have been personal safety and lone working training undertaken, but I don't have the figure to present to you available to me around what that's happened, or how often that's happened over the last year.
So these courses for 24, 25, the last column then, are all courses that have been run since the 1st of April last year. Is that correct?
Yes.
So here we are in almost a year later, and that's telling me that we've not run a single course for personal safety and lone working. And then you tie it in with Table 2, accidents and violent incidents, and there's a significant increase in PCC incidences. I would have tied the two together and said, is that increase down to the fact that we've not run any courses on personal safety and lone working? Just my take on what I'm looking at here in front of me, but that does bother me. I would have thought there would have been more courses on that, given the world that we live in today as much as anything else, but that's a comment on that one. But if there have been courses that have been run, perhaps you could report that back just to fill in that particular block. And while I'm on a roll, Chairman, again, Councillor Gerardo mentioned the asbestos one. There's been one asbestos-related incident reported to Corporate Health and Safety Team involving contractors, i.e. not a PCC failing. What does PCC failing mean? So who failed then? The inference is that we didn't fail, somebody must have failed. That's how I'm taking that brackets. Is that correct?
Well, again, you can read it like that, yes, certainly.
Well, I'm reading what's in brackets, not a PCC failing. So therefore, if you're putting it up and saying it's not a PCC failing, you're inferring that it's somebody else's failing to me. That's my inference from the report. Mm-hmm. Whereas if the correct procedure was picked up, and that's what's suggested in the bullet point, that the correct procedures followed it and the procedures were carried through, and all right, the procedures were reviewed. Whose failure was it? Was the contractor's failure or was it our failure? You're saying it's not ours, it must have been the contractor's failure then.
Well, yeah, that is the process for asbestos management. So effectively, you produce an asbestos risk register, and there is an element where contractors have a responsibility to read that and understand that when they're going onto site.
So therefore then, if we obviously have a PCC risk register and a risk assessment that we expect our contractors to follow when they're working on PCC sites, whatever that action might actually be. Therefore, they would have had to have followed some sort of induction process, and their operatives would have had to sign off to say that they read and followed it. Therefore, if they didn't follow it, it strikes me that there is a failing somewhere in the connect between contractors being asked to follow and confirm a risk assessment or a risk audit, whichever way you want to look at it, and what we're doing. Are we just taking it on face value that, oh, they've signed it therefore, and we're not actually following through on that risk assessment audit? It's the environment I work in, so I know what I'm talking about. So is there something that needs to be looked at there to make sure that PCC contractors are following down the guidelines and risk assessments that PCC are laying out for them when they actually go onto our sites? Is there a failing there somewhere?
Jeremy, would you like to come in on that or any of the other points that Councillor Bosher raised?
Well, only that's obviously something that I can take back and look at with my colleagues in building services.
Thank you very much. And with regards to the data table, is it possible to get that breakdown sent out at the same time you give us the update on the asbestos incident?
Certainly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Corkery, did you have your hand up earlier? No, I think okay. Councillor Sanders.
Thanks very much, Stuart. I think there are several things that are there are things that are concerning in here, but I'm not totally sure they involve this council as such. The most concerning one is the massive increase in violent incidents and accidents in schools. And I think decoupling that very, very quickly will be very, very helpful, especially if you, Mr. Underdown, have said this is part of a national trend. That's deeply worrying in itself. And I think once we know that, then I'm sure between us we will be able to start lobbying the Department for Education to try and see whether there are ways in which we can reduce the national trend. Because there shouldn't be violence in our schools. Pupils certainly shouldn't be beating teachers up. And that seems to be what's happening. And that is deeply, deeply worrying. My question related to that, Mr. Underdown, is it's not so much the PCC aspect that we need to liaise with. It's more around the individual academies that run our schools. What sort of liaison is there between the PCC health and safety team and the individual teams within the academies around these violent incidents? Are we monitoring their actions in terms of how they handle these incidents or not?
So the data reported on schools relates obviously to local authority maintained schools, but it will only relate to schools that we provide health and safety services to through traded services agreement. So in terms of an overall picture, I'm not sure whether or not our colleagues in education receive data from academies as part of their day-to-day work and liaisons in terms of managing education. But effectively, we work with a number of academies that effectively we provide health and safety services for as part of the traded services, and that's what this data will include.
Okay. So, I mean, I'll come back to that in a second. So what is the process with our local authority maintained schools that we have in order to try and deal with this huge increase in violent incidents? How does it work? Do you go in? How does it monitor? What processes are in place to try and cut this back, assuming the massive increase is all violent incidents and not accidents? How does it work? Do you talk to the head teachers?
So, yes and no, effectively. So, we obviously share this data with our colleagues and in education, and we share our data directly back with the schools to advise them of the current picture. I think that's kind of sort of picking up on the point that we want to address in the coming year. Councillor Sanders, in terms of defining those roles and responsibilities around who should be taking some of this forward. My kind of view would be that it's those within the education sector that would be well placed to understand and help develop those kind of solutions to what is clearly a growing problem from the data.
That's sort of what I'm hoping we'll get to, because this should at least be shared with the schools forum. It should certainly be shared with the cabinet member and the director of children's services, and then action plans should be able to be put in place on the director of education, because this is a really concerning trend. And the fact is, if this is only the council's own schools and this is part of a national trend, then that means the position is 150 times worse, because there are so many academies. And if this is part of a national trend, then we have to try and stop it, because there's no expected norms for kids beating up their teachers. That's not an expected norm. That's silly. So I think, Mr. Stewart, can I suggest that Mr. Underdown and the team works out a plan to try and work with our local authority maintained schools in the first instance, and then where we can to try and work out academies in terms of research and everything else, so that we can all work together to come up with a coherent plan to try and cut this. Because this is deep. I thought work-related violence was just people shouting at council officers, but this is clearly has the potential to be much, much worse and much more significant. And I think what I'm picking up from colleagues here is a sense of we need to find a way of trying either to stamp it out or to cut it down significantly.
Councillor Bosher.
Yeah, I could just follow on from what Councillor Sanders was actually saying. I mean, perhaps it's my naivety. I just had that presumption that school incidents, let's call it was that, was all the schools within our local authority area, irrespective of whether they are academies or not. If some of them aren't buying into us in that respect, then actually these figures coming from a smaller pool make them sound an awful lot worse. I mean, I look at my area and I've got Springfield and the two Solent schools. They're all an academy group. I know that there is periodic violence that goes on in that school. It's a school environment. But arguably, if they're not buying into that, then the total figures for the whole of Drayton and Farlington are zero, because nobody's doing it, which makes it worse. Following on, I would like to know, if we can, a list of the schools that we do actually support with this data that these incidents have come from, and those that don't, because I think that might give us a wider picture, if I'm at all honest. But yeah, I think we're all picking up on this one, but I think we're all picking up on this one for very, very good reason. And it's all well and good reporting incidents, but we need to see that there's an action plan happening to reduce this, because I don't want Portsmouth to be one of the expected norms for this sector, quote unquote.
Councillor Gerarda.
Thank you, Chair. Just, yeah, to really reinforce what Councillor Sanders and Councillor Bosher have said there, and I think potentially another important sort of stakeholder to liaise with would be the National Education Union as well, because if this is part of a national trend, they're probably doing a lot of work to try and tackle the issue nationally. And this would sort of fit in with what's kind of happening with a lot of frontline workers in various industries at the moment, because USDRAW has been campaigning about shop workers, transport unions are campaigning about violence towards transport workers, which is on the increase, and it would seem that obviously this is something that teachers are experiencing as well. So I think it would be really important to include trade unions in as a major stakeholder that we engage with. But yeah, really endorse the suggestion by both Councillor Sanders and Councillor Bosher to try and get an action plan to tackle this, because it's very, very worrying.
So I think, Jeremy, the first step is getting that segmented data so that we know how many of each instance are from the accident or violent reports. If it turns out that the number of violent incidents is low and has stayed low, not just looking at this year's data for that segmenting, but looking at the trend over the past few years, that's less urgent and less worrying. If it does show that the number of violent incidents is what's causing that spike, then I think, yeah, the sooner we can see that action plan, the better. Councillor Sanders.
I'd have happily come in when you finished, Stuart. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think, while Simon is right, we do need to look at the schools. There is clearly going to be some bits that cannot be put into the public domain. It's as simple as that. Which schools have which numbers. I think that's very, very difficult stuff.
I wasn't asking for numbers against schools. I was just wanting a list of...
Just a case of that.
I think that's a much more sensible approach. I didn't want anybody to sort of think that we were, naming
no,
names.
I don't think anyone was suggesting that
which
we
is
want to
very
know how
good
many
news.
schools have got.
But I totally support what Simon is saying. We need to know the data, work out what we're doing, and then work with everyone on a plan.
Just for clarity, I'm not looking for the numbers, as I mentioned, and this list doesn't have to be tied in to that table. It was just understanding which schools / academies we support from a health and safety point of view and which ones we don't. Then it doesn't make any correlation to that data. That was all I was interested in.
No, well, that's exactly what I understood by your question, Councillor, so I think you were perfectly clear on that. Yes, knowing which schools are feeding into the data, and then from the data set as a whole, how many incidents are violent and how many are accidents.
That's how I'd understood it anyway.
Yeah,
so no problem.
fantastic. Members, are there any other questions on this report? If not, the recommendation is that we note the report. I think we should also possibly have in the minutes our concerns, particularly over the schools data that's just been discussed. Is that okay to add to the minutes, please, Jane? Lovely. Members, is that agreed? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Jeremy, you're welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting. However, if you have other business to attend to, you are welcome to depart.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. That brings us back in the agenda to item 4, which is the pay policy statements 25-26, and over to Rochelle.
Thank you. So the pay policy statement, as you're aware, is a statutory report which is due to be published at the end of this month. Probably the least contentious, I think, out of all the reports we're bringing today. There's no significant changes to note. The pay multiple has changed, as it does every year, as it's based on the difference between the highest paid salary and the median salary of the whole workforce, and we're currently at 6.4. What we tend to do is once everybody's published their pay policy statement, which is the end of March, we include a summary table. So for next year, you'll see where we are in terms of ranking with like council. So there's a table in there in this report, but that relates to previous year's data because we have to wait for everybody to publish. We're normally in and amongst our peers in terms of that multiplier. In terms of where we are, that leaves us with a median salary of 29,655. Last year we reported the pay multiple as 6.3, so there's not a statistically significant difference between last year and this year. The pay ratio has changed as it does every year, as it's based on the relationship between the base salaries of the lowest paid and the highest paid PCC employees. It's currently 1 to 8.14, which is down from the previous year, which we reported at 1 to 8.23. So again, not statistically significant, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rochelle. Members, any questions on this report? Councillor Dorado.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rochelle, for the report. I just wondered on table 3, where it lists what our rating as compared to other comparable authorities. I did just sort of do a bit of analysis myself and saw that we are kind of at the higher end. I know obviously that's mentioned in the report, and I just wondered if you had a sense of why that is compared to other authorities of similar sizes. Thank you.
There can be many reasons. It depends on the makeup of the organisation, and for us it depends on where we have our staff sit. So what services are in-house and what services are externalised. So we might see this change, for example, based on the services we bring in-house. So for example, when we moved waste collection in-house, that will show up on next year's report. So it depends which services are internal and which services are external. So although we provide the table, it does depend on how authorities are made up in terms of that gap. Also depends if people are real living wage employers. We obviously are, but some are, some aren't. That can change the ratio as well. So there can be various reasons. Lots of councils have had shared arrangements that can change the salary for their senior officers who are then looking after multiple councils, and you'll see those arrangements commence and then end. So all of those things can have a slight difference. So it's never an exact science when we're comparing to our neighbours, but it gives an indicator of those with similar size makeup as our organisation.
Rochelle, would it be just worth clarifying, with pay multiples, is it the lower the number, the narrower the spreads in the wage differences?
Yes.
Yeah. So having a lower number, for example, than Bolton, by a significant amount, is good, and a higher one than Southend just means Southend have a lower paid chief executive, probably?
Presumably, yes.
Yeah. So we really want to compare it to the councils of similar size, similar number of employees, similar functions delivered. Members, any other questions? Councillor Corkery.
Thank you. Rochelle, I know in previous years we've had discussions around the living wage and the point at which it's uprated, and I know previously there was a disconnect between when the Living Wage Foundation uprated their rate and when PCC staff were receiving it because of the way in which local government pay works. I think previously we had committed to just paying the Living Wage Foundation rate from the date that it uprates rather than having to wait each year for the for the local government kind of pay review settlement. I just wanted to check if that's still the position, or was that something we did as a one-off? But
From my recollection, I will double check, but we get the rates in November and we commit to pay it by April. What we don't often have now is the local government pay settlement by April. So we still pay the real living wage in advance of the local government settlement, which can sometimes skew our data as well. So sometimes what we report at the time of coming to committee versus what we'll bring back next year when the data's all gone through as the comparison table, it may change a little bit because we will get the pay award backdated when we don't know what it is at the time of reporting. So yes, it can skew the data ever so slightly, but we commit to pay that on the 1st of April regardless. And then when we find out what the cost of living is for everybody else, we then have to do a big exercise to align everything later in the year so we don't make people wait.
okay, great, thank you.
Members, any further questions on the report? No? Lovely. In which case, the recommendation is that the committee approve the pay policy statement as attached at Appendix 1 to go forward for approval by full council prior to 31st of March 2025. Members are all in favour? Lovely, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5, Gender Pay Gap Report 24-25. Rochelle.
Thank you. So this is another statutory report that we're required to publish by the end of the month, so coming to Employment Committee. It's quite a positive story, I guess, if you're looking at it from gender equality in terms of pay. So we've seen decreases in both the mean and median gender pay gap figures from last year. Again, there's often lots of reasons for this, but some of the contributors to the reason for that change is we have a female chief executive. In the workforce, we also have an increase in childcare hours, which is enabling more women to be able to return to work for more hours, therefore opening up more opportunities to work in different roles. We've seen an increase, as the report says, in full-time workers. So again, that enables more people to, the breadth of roles available is greater if you're able to work full-time. And we've also seen bottom-loaded pay awards in recent years, and the real living wage increase a percentage increase higher than the highest paid people. So that's likely why we've seen that gap shrink. So the mean gender pay gap, so that's the mean hourly rate of pay for male full pay relevant employees and that of female full pay relevant employees, has reduced from 8.63 to 5.62. And the median has reduced from 7.54 to 7.11, so a smaller reduction. We've included our action plan and we've made progress against most of the areas. Some of the things that say ongoing, it's because they are ongoing. We do them annually, but in other areas we have seen improvements on, which is in the report. In terms of the workforce profile of our data, it's showing a consistent increase in full-time employees year on year, and that we're seeing a trend across, again, nationally. That's the cost of living is there. In terms of the action plan, what you're likely to see next year, due to the demographic of our organisation and potential changes in legislation, we're likely to include the menopause action plan as part of this action plan as well, because we're 70% female workforce and of the appropriate age range. So instead of having separate action plans as per the legislation, we're likely to combine them because there's similar actions that will help improve for this report as well as the menopause ones. We've not included the action plan this year, but we're likely to include it for next year. The only other thing that we haven't included in there in terms of actions that we're doing, you're probably aware, it's International Women's Day this week, so we've got lots of work going on over the Civic, I've got my purple pen, to really promote and make pledges up in the view. We've got something really visual in there where people can celebrate women and have pledges as to how they're going to improve gender equality as well. So lots of work happening over there, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Members, any questions on the gender pay gap report? Councillor Gerardo.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you. And yeah, it's good to see that it's largely very positive and moving in the right direction, and good to see that national policy like the free childcare hours are making a difference as well. I just had a question around the 3.4.3 section about bonuses, and obviously that those are the only bits that aren't going in the right direction. So I just wondered, what there is that can be done to try and tackle that. But I understand it might just be because of who's in particular roles. But yeah, I'll let you explain. Thanks, Rochelle.
That's fine, thank you. Yeah, that is one of the areas that we're aware of. So in terms of bonus, just to clarify, the City Council doesn't pay bonuses as such. We don't have bonuses with public sector, but we do have things like honorarias and those sorts of payments. So we list all the payments that we do have. It's mainly down to the areas of work. Well, I think this will change next year because I think we refer, or it might be one of the other papers actually, we refer to some work that we've done in children, families and education, and specifically the social workers, which are a more female-dominated workforce than male, but we won't see that filter through until next year. But this is just the pockets of the organisation where those payments exist, but it is on our radar. We have got reviews in a couple of areas where they are predominantly male orientated, so we're likely to see that change. But in terms of robustness, all of our payments are reviewed either annually or biannually, so we're confident where payments are being made that they're appropriate to make, but it's also where we have people in the organisation. We tend to still see men in slightly higher paid roles, and you're less likely to see payments, additional payments being made in the caring types of roles, because it's really challenging to sort of articulate, although they do brilliant work, saving children and working with our elderly population, it's just less likely to receive those sorts of payments in that type of area. But it is something that we are alert to, and we do take papers to pay steering group to give a full breakdown. I won't go into the breakdown here because people will be identifiable, but we do have that breakdown and we are monitoring that.
Councillor Sanders.
Two things. In 3.3.8, you say there are two areas where essentially the gap between male and female wages is increasing, which is 16 to 21-year-olds full-time and 22 to 29-year-olds part-time. Are there any changes, like for instance changes to the national living wage for apprentices, that will reduce that gap? That's my first question.
We pay our apprentices the real living wage, so what happens nationally doesn't necessarily impact us within the City Council.
So I'll add a third question at this stage, which is, why is the gap going up then?
We don't know, but we are looking into it because we guess somebody would ask us that. So we can look into it. I'm not sure off the top of my head why it would be in those categories. It's the statistics don't lie, that's what they're telling us, but we can certainly look into it and try and come back with more detail once we've had a breakdown. The difficulty with some of the reporting is we get the data quite late, so it's quite hard to interrogate all of it, to get all the answers ready for the reporting timeline, but it's certainly something we can look into, and if members are happy, if we have any rationale, we can circulate that after the meeting.
I certainly would be, because I think it's useful that we always unpick the learning, and honesty is always very welcome.
Please, Rochelle, if you can.
Secondly, does this include care professionals, particularly adult social care? Does that cover within this, or what?
It covers all everyone employed by Portsmouth City Council, so it's, yes, adult social care is in our staff, but not any services that are contracted out.
Because clearly the government is looking at the Fair Pay Agreement for adult social care, and it will have its own pay body coming down the track very, very soon. Have we had any indications as to how that might look?
No, we've had indications it's coming, but not what it will look like. So we will participate as we do with all pay agreements, but no detail at this time.
No, because certainly Stuart, certainly from the briefings I've been on with regards to pay, there are two areas, which is the school support staff pay body and the adult social care pay body, which will fall outside of the normal pay arrangements for local government employees. And at the moment, they're due to start around about 2027. But at the moment, there's no indication, as Rochelle has said, of who's going to be included. The only indication we've got from the adult social care body, which I hope will change, is that councils will not be compensated for any increases. They're going to find it themselves. I hope that changes, because I think it's a good thing that we're finally getting fair pay in social care. But if it is a case, then we may need to not just more than stump up the cheque without finding out where. But I think that it might be good for Rochelle just to keep us posted as we wander along in this, because that's a real change, much of which is good. But yeah, that's a real change going forwards.
Thank you. Councillor Corkery.
In terms of the bonus pay gaps, do they include consideration of, I forgot exactly what it's called, but it's market supplements?
Yes.
That's included within the bonuses?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. And could you explain, because I know you referenced honoraria, what the policy is generally in terms of awarding honoraria across the council?
So it falls under our exceptional duties. So if people have undertaken something above and beyond their role, but it's a one-off, it's not ongoing. So it's completely different to acting up, which is where you say somebody's not in because they're unwell or they're off on another project, you would act up to their role. There's a separate payment for that. An honoraria is something where you've gone above and beyond and it's recognised with a one-off payment that's generally based on a formula of it would normally be this person undertaking this work and it would cost this, or there's been significant additional hours in place.
Members, any other questions on this report? No, thank you very much. Recommendation is for us to note the report, note the key findings of the report, and to note the action plan and recommendations. Members, are those both noted? Lovely, thank you very much. Moving on now to item 7, Employment Trends Report, which is in the supplementary agenda pack. Rochelle.
Thank you. So this was the newest report, I guess, that we were asked to bring to members as requested, because this follows on from the report that Natasha brings in November, which gives you an insight into the internal and external market. So this is focusing on PCC. So the purpose of the report is to present to the committee a more detailed workforce analysis on turnover, age profile and succession planning, and probably more importantly, what we're doing to try and address some of those concerns. I won't go through all of the data because there's a lot of data in there, but it just in terms of a snapshot, turnover has reduced by 2%. So at the last year's reporting, we were reporting 14% turnover. In this report, it's reduced slightly to 12%. Again, this is in line with the national reporting for public services, which also reported 12%. Just as a reminder, turnover isn't necessarily a negative indicator. We need turnover if we're going, especially if we're going to encourage new people into the organisation. So we tend to try and focus more on where we are losing staff. So one of the examples in there you will see is children, families and education, where it notes that we're still losing social worker roles and we're also losing business support. The social worker role would be an area that we would focus on as an area of concern because clearly they're hard to recruit and hard to retain. So in relation to that, we've undertaken a huge piece of work to look at the pay for that area. You won't see any impact to that work until next year's report. So as well as focusing on the reasons for leaving, our action plan is based around the quantitative as well as the qualitative data and what we need to do to try and attract new people to local government. In terms of the age profile, we've just noted down the following services have the highest percentage of employees in the age 55 to 59 age range, and those are adults, children, culture, economy planning and transport, and HMBS. So again, there are areas where we're working with proactively to try and improve the picture. I won't go through all the data, but I'm happy to answer questions. So I was just going to focus a little bit on the action plan because I know members last time asked what we were doing in this place. So just as a reminder, the overall aim is to improve our employee value proposition. And action since we last met, I think we've actually delivered on nearly everything that we had committed to. So in terms of corporate tools, Jez mentioned before that we've launched our new Skillsgate, which is our new learning management system. So we've been out without a system for over 2 years. So this has enabled us now to be able to report on our training. And there's a real big push at the moment for completion of mandatory training. We're also reviewing with our subject matter experts how we can improve that mandatory offer. It includes our preventing sexual harassment training as well as all of our other health and safety training. Sorry, I don't know what that noise is.
That's usually if there's a phone too close to the microphone.
Okay. Oh, it might be the laptop. Let me move. I'll carry on. Alongside that, actions include the launch of our recruitment system. So we've moved from the Oracle-based option through to a bespoke TriPad system, which is significantly better already. And we've also improved our careers portal. So I don't know if any of you regularly look at our jobs, but our careers portal has had a complete rebrand, utilising both local material and national material. So that's phase 1 of our careers portal update. Phase 2 will now be focusing on how we can improve the traffic moving to our careers portal. So that's looking at using our social media platforms and how we can use the national LGA's, National Recruitment Campaign material on our social media platforms to improve the diversity of candidates applying for roles. We're also at the point of building the reports in the recruitment system and the LMS system. So once we've built the reports, we should be able to give you more detail on who are applying for roles, understand where our barriers or blockages are, and what we can proactively do to encourage a more diverse pool of candidates. In terms of, I know members asked for this last time, in terms of VivUp, which is our recognition and benefits platform, we've given you a whole host of data in there in terms of how that's being used, but just in terms of a few key snippets. We've had 394 employees who have received enhanced counselling services in the last 12 months. We've had, it's more than this now, but 259 online GP consultations booked via VivUp. So we're getting really positive feedback because the struggles people are having and the difficulties with people being able to contact their own GPs. It's been a game changer for us. Will writing service, we've had nearly 200 employees make appointments and nearly 150 participate in the free will making service. Again, that's gone down really well. Home and electronics scheme, which enables people to buy goods and repay them at an affordable rate via their pay. We've had over 700 orders, the average order being around £300. So again, a really positive move. We launched that and really pushed that just before Christmas to enable people to take advantage. We've also got a range of lifestyle benefits that people have purchased, which has enabled staff to save just over £20,000. So this is being able to upload things for supermarkets like Tesco at a reduced rate and then go and do your shopping. You can do that whilst you're in the store or in advance, so really positive savings there. As well as the AVC scheme, which has enabled the council to make significant savings in terms of our NI contributions as well. So it's a really popular service and it's going really well. The recognition side of things, we have a recognition portal on there, so staff, managers, staff, peer-to-peer are able to go in and recognise against our list of values, the PCC values, as well as going the extra mile. We've also, up until last week, had a visual aid in the view where people have been able to put post-it notes on. We've now taken those down, we've replaced it for International Women's Day, but we'll be rotating that on a regular basis. At the last meeting, we were asked about the wellbeing groups and work groups that we've had. So since the last meeting, we've launched the LGBTQ+ support group, which got really positive attendance. We've also hosted the Employee Roadshow that was hosted in civic offices, so we were able to showcase all of our benefits platform. We had everyone down. It was a really popular event, really, really well received from staff. The only one we haven't progressed with as yet that Councillor Gerardo asked about last time was around female health and I think IVF, endometriosis, child loss. It's a really sensitive subject, so we are still pursuing links because we need a specialist almost to come in to upskill somebody initially to set that group up, and we've had a little bit of reluctance from staff to participate, but it is still on our agenda. So once we've got the skill set, that's certainly something we'll be pushing, but we don't want to push it before we're ready and have the skill set in place. So lots of other things that we're doing in there under the umbrella of Proud to Work for PCC. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Lovely, thank you very much. A quick question for you regarding the table on termination reasons with the directorates with the highest turnover. So if I'm reading this right, the bottom reason of no reason, is that there was no reason for someone leaving, or no reason was able to be gathered from their exit interview?
It means they've, not participated in an exit interview or declined to have an exit interview.
And that figure's sitting at around 12.5%, which is 1/8 of all leavers.
Until recently, it's a bit like Jez says, where we've been able to move forward with some of our systems, this is an area that we hope reporting will be better. It's been a bit ad hoc and it's been left to managers to be able to do that, but now HR are recording some of these things centrally. We hope to be able to improve the statistics with that because we've got some online reports. So we've got an online form that the staff member can fill out, as well as the interactive interview with someone, either your manager or someone of your choice. So we hope that that statistic will reduce because we should get better reasons.
Yeah, I would be worried that literally 1/8 of all people leaving the organisation, we have no idea why, because that could significantly skew any one of the other categories. Okay, super, thank you. Members, any questions on this report? Councillor Bosher.
Just following back on that, if the exit interview used to be done by managers beforehand, then if somebody is completely dissatisfied with their manager, then they're probably going to say no reason, aren't they? Unless they want to chalk it up with a violent incident from the previous report, maybe. So sometimes I think termination reasons can be given depending on who is asking the question in the first place. And if you're doing it through the neutrality of human resources now, I think you're probably right. I think no reason will start to reduce as people feel they can be more open if they're leaving for a negative reason. That's the only comment as such I'm going to make on that. Other than the only other quick comment I'm going to make is 3.24, figure 4, work age distribution by directives. It's a fabulous graph, but when it's 50 shades of grey, it makes it very difficult to actually read what we're looking at, which is, it would have been nice if that had been colour, but I fully appreciate that.
I believe the PDFs that are published online are in colour.
Councillor Dent's brave new world of a paperless society, it might be an easier way of putting it, but yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Corkery, were you indicating?
It was just a kind of passing comment, really, but in terms of one of the benefits being the home and electronic scheme, which allows people to buy stuff and then pay it back out of their salary over 12 months, my employer has a similar kind of scheme, and I looked at it recently because we needed a new laptop, and I thought, oh, I'll check it out. Looked at a laptop, it looked all right, so it was about £500, and I was kind of tempted to go for it because then you just pay back, I mean, 10 lots of £50 or whatever. But I googled it, exactly the same laptop, it was £350 from alternative suppliers. So I'm just quite wary of these kind of schemes because we might be seen to be recommending it to staff, or staff are using it because it's associated with their employer, like I almost did, when actually it's potentially not great financial advice, or there might be kind of issues, you know what I mean, around it. So I guess just something to flag for future reference.
We certainly don't give out financial advice in HR, we don't dare, but no, I do take your point. What we do have as an alternative, so we still expect people to shop around, so there's the home and electronic scheme where you can buy and pay back, or for example, if you find something at a different supplier, it may be that we have a discount code, so for example, at Currys, for example, you can get money off. So there should be multiple ways that staff members can look to see what the best option is for them and make sure it's affordable. We also have our due diligence in place that we never allow people to drop below the real living wage, so they can't overcommit. So in terms of our financial due diligence, our finance colleagues have been in place, and if there's multiple people use it on multiple occasions, there will be an intervention. So we won't enable people to knowingly get into debt. But I take your point that we always need to shop around, but we're trying to get more local suppliers on there as well, because that's really important to us. So it's getting the balance between the best value for staff and also the social part of making sure that we keep the Portsmouth pound in Portsmouth. So it's a balancing out to get multiple, as many options as we can, and small businesses as well, but always shop around. Yes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanders.
3 areas to cover for me. Firstly, I can assist Simon by saying that actually online and on the website, the PDF version of that table is in full Technicolor, although they do look to be about 50 shades of several colours for it. And that's just done off a council laptop as opposed to the brave new world that I think we both don't like, put forward by some of our colleagues. 4.5 essentially is the stuff around workforce outlook. And there's one sentence in there which really, well, there's 2 sentences that concern me, which is a recent labour market winter outlook, the net employment balance, in other words, how many more people is the public sector recruiting than the private sector recruiting, has seen the heaviest fall since 2014. That's bad for the public sector. But then it says the reason is that many employers are looking to decrease their headcount due to increases in employer NI costs. Now, I thought that we as councils, like the rest of the public sector, were being compensated in full for the increase in employer NI costs. Am I being criminally naive, Rochelle?
I believe that the situation was that we were originally not getting anything, and then we were getting it in full, and then it was capped at a certain amount.
I would have to check the figures, but my understanding is from finance colleagues that we are not being compensated in full, and that's hence the CIPD reporting on that quite strongly as impacting all sectors.
Fully understand how it might have missed you by, given how quickly the news cycles on various different topics have been moving over the last couple of months, but I believe there were, at least if not U-turns, certainly L-bends on that particular issue.
I refuse to accept that. But anyway, I think, because I do think that's a genuine issue, because we do have issues with recruitment and retention going forwards. And the last thing we want is to pay more money than we need, when we actually should be trying to keep recruiting and retaining people as we go forwards. And I think that's also related to the care sector as well, because you talk about pressures on local pay, Rochelle, in Section 6. We'll leave aside the pleasure of the NJC pay awards, which I think will be changed over time, I'm guessing. But again, the care sector seems to be ground zero in all this. The government is rightly looking at a fair pay agreement for the care sector. How bad is the sort of, it's easier to stack shelves in Aldi than it is to work in a care home, affecting our ability to maintain this vital sector?
I think sometimes it's not just easier to do so, it's also better paid to do so.
That was what I was trying to say, and you said it better, Stuart.
Rochelle?
Yeah, it's an area of competition that in the past we've never had before in terms of supermarkets, because it's not just the pay rates, but it's also the benefits of working in the supermarket in terms of the cost of living. If you're getting a reduction on your weekly shop, monthly shop, then there's a real attraction there, which is why we're trying to remain competitive in other areas. So the more benefits that we can offer in terms of our overall EVP and promote those in terms of offering the same in terms of supermarket discounts, which we can via a different mechanism. It's really important. Well, similar. You won't see all the good deals unless you're in the supermarket.
Having worked in a food shop for 10 years, believe me, having first dibs at the reduced items at the end of the day is always a good thing.
I can imagine. Yeah, so it is a real issue for us. We are still reliant on agency staff in some areas, which obviously costs more in the long run. So yeah, it is a genuine issue, and I think that if the Fair Pay Agreement can look to address it, but it's how affordable that is, obviously, for local authorities as well. And
then I think going forwards, particularly around the local government reorganisation documents we have to submit in about 16 days, I think it will be useful, Rochelle, to sort of feed into that with the potential barriers going forwards with regards to cost. Like, for instance, if we merge with Hampshire Social Care, do we have to then take on Hampshire's pay, or do they take on ours? That's not clear, but that does affect the overall sustainability of the public services that are provided. Is that a piece that is already being looked at, or is that just in the not too hard category, but the we don't know category?
At the moment, it's in the we don't know category, because it really will depend on how things pan out. I'm not privy to the plans, so I haven't seen the plans. I don't know what the plans are. Once we know what the plans are, we're already thinking in that way, but it depends what mechanism we use to create the new world and what that will look like. We all know there's TUPE protections. There are so many variables at the moment. So we've been asked not to undertake any investigative work at this moment in time, because it's not appropriate to do so.
I think that is an entirely sensible approach, given how many different combinations of geographical makeup the new councils could have, let alone anything else. That until we actually know what ballpark we're playing in, let alone what game we are playing, it would make sense just to figure it out when it's an appropriate time to do so.
I think that tray with the we don't know bit is a very full tray.
I can say to opposition colleagues that the cabinet meeting was thought that the chief executive's got about 800 questions for all this, all in 16 days, which will be mildly amusing to all of us, especially if you can answer any or get any answers. But again, it's just one of the barriers that we've got, and we need to try and work this through as we go forwards, because otherwise, you're right, we just don't know where we're going.
Members, any other questions on this report? No, lovely. This report is for noting. Is it so noted? Lovely, thank you very much. Which brings us to our final item on today's agenda, which is a verbal update from Rochelle on the quarterly sickness absence report.
Thank you, Chair. So just as a reminder, the reason we haven't been able to bring the full report this year is because our system that we use in the council has had a major update following the whole of the absence had to be rebuilt in there relating to teachers' pensions. I won't bore you with all the details of that, but what we are able to get are the headlines, which again I'm happy to circulate, we just don't have the breakdown. So the top reasons for absence are psychological, non-work related, virus, which is not unusual for the reporting period, and psychological work related. And I know this is an area that members will be particularly interested in and have been in the past, so we need to really start focusing in on what's happening in that space. We don't at this stage have a breakdown into the job roles and job types, but we're hoping to have that in the next few months so that we can really drill down in the analysis and find out what's happening. We can confirm that the only services that absence levels have decreased since the last report are the executive, HMBS and the port, so that's really positive because the port and HMBS are areas where we've seen higher absence levels in the past, so to see a decrease is positive. All other services saw a slight increase. The average working days lost is 9.75 in February 2024, reducing to 9.16 in June 2024. We're up again to 9.65 as of reporting in February 2025. So a slight reduction on year reporting timeframes, but a slight increase from the last time we saw you. Two of the top three absence reasons have increased, and that's psychological stress, anxiety and depression has increased by 18.97% of working time loss to 20.92% working time loss, and virus has increased from 10.73 to 11.19. And psychological work related, which is the one to watch, has decreased slightly from 9.09% of working time loss to 8.17% of working time loss. And for the next report, we'll be able to give you a more in-depth breakdown of what the types of job roles are for those. But in terms of the interventions, everything we've listed in the Workforce Trends report and our Gender Pay Gap report in terms of our action plans are all aligned to our top reasons for absence and the problem that we're trying to solve. So next time I hope to be able to give you a more detailed breakdown. If members would like the summary table of the that we normally include in one of the appendices, I can send that around. It just won't have the breakdown as we are normally able to do.
Yes, if you could circulate that to members, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Corkery.
Thank you, Rochelle. I was listening to a podcast today, and one of the things they were talking about on it, which probably tells you about kind of podcasts I listen to, but anyway, it was about some research that's recently been done, I think by LSE, into the kind of long-term impacts on staff of hybrid or home working. And one of the findings were that the people that were able or were working at home typically had lower sickness rates, which I guess is kind of unsurprising. I'm just curious about what PCC's approach is, and maybe that it varies across the organisation, but it'd be useful to know, because I know now there's a policy stroke expectation that certain numbers of days per week people will be in the office. I'm just curious about how flexible that is in the event of, for example, sickness, whereby someone may feel well enough to work at home but not at the office. Is that a fairly easy thing that they can say that to their manager, or is there kind of, how easy is that for people to do?
Yeah, so the corporate position is that for full-time workers, the policy position is you will attend your place of work for a minimum of 2 days per week, and if you're part-time, it's 1 day per week as a minimum. Lots of people do more, just because I'm in nearly 4 days a week all the time because the meetings and everything else require you to be there. In terms of flexibility, it is absolutely flexible for temporary reasons, such as illnesses. So, for example, I've got somebody in my office who has a suspected broken ankle. We'll know when she eventually gets an x-ray. She will work from home because that's a temporary arrangement. Her permanent position is attending the place of work for 2 days a week. This is a temporary arrangement. So there's been no mandate that we can stop the flexibility. It's just the expectation is the norm. We attend our place of work for a minimum of 2 days per week.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? I recognise we don't have a physical report in front of us, but based on Rochelle's excellent verbal update, any questions about sickness absence? No, lovely. In which case we will look forward to a comprehensive report in due course, as and when the system wants to throw the data out at us properly. Members, that brings us to the end of today's meeting at 18:30.